We were talking this morning about it doesn't look like he was ever flipped.
No.
So
He was
unmistakably buried on that side.
He was buried on his right side. Now understand that, the way that the ancient Egyptians thought about the way their tombs functioned is you wanted to be lying on your side looking out towards the east and the rising sun. And actually what we found at Abydos is that the location of the head also spatially was in a direct line with where the false door and the chapel on the surface was.
You mean each mummy's head?
Each mummy's head, was there was a spatial relationship between where the mummy's head was underground and which way he was looking, and on the surface where the false door feature of the public chapel was. The way that the Abydos cemetery in Dynasty 6 was developed, it was anchored by at least 3 or 4 monumental tombs. In those coffins, the feature inscribed on the coffin through which the mummy's eyes would be looking out, those are on the north end of the coffin, which meant the figure would have to be on his left side so he could look out, okay? At least one of the anchoring elite tombs on the southern end of the cemetery, the tomb chamber is facing south. Actually, since last season, I'm in a position to say that all 3 of the underground tomb chambers we know of now from the south end of the cemetery, the chambers go south. So if the internal feature on the coffin through which the mummy was supposed to look followed that pattern, then he would have to be on his right side.
If you want to have him head south but facing east, you have to lie on your right side. So this mummy at the Carlos Museum is lying on his right side, and he's slightly flexed, and unfortunately the head's now detached, but you can still see, and they've got lots of loops around where they were doing their best to keep the neck and the head stable, because one of the greatest fears from later texts we know is, I do not want to lose my head. Because the head is, of course, the most recognizable part of your body.
And it often falls off.
It does. That's that point of contact that is the most fragile.
But the skull has fallen off. Were you able to actually look at the skull separately from the body this morning?
Yeah, we did. But I mean, the way the mummy was made definitely tells us that he is elite also, because you've got the shoulder blades are very carefully modeled, and it's you can see the muscles of the back made with rolls of linen. They give you the modeling of the back, and follows down, and I have to say that it is very nice.
Handsome derriere.
Lovely butt, good butt, and it's got a little bit of painted on resin, and then in the front, over the chest, you have this crisscrossing over where basically the pectoral muscles would be, and sort of little, not big man boobs, just very discreet, but crisscrossing, and so you have a sense of substance over there. And again, this is the body that's being transformed by linen into a statue of itself. And then the belly is the best bit. He has a little belly that sags, and it looks really realistic when you're on your side. God forbid, not all of us were born with flat stomachs. But you have the little belly hanging over just as it would.
The other thing to note about the belly is that it's a trope in ancient Egyptian art.
You mean like a pictorial symbol?
Yeah, if you want to show yourself as an accomplished, senior, wealthy official, you depicted yourself as a man with a belly.
Yeah. It meant that you ate well.
Yeah. These early mummies are like soft sculpture in that they're trying to replicate the body in the wrapping. So the degree of preservation isn't as advanced as what we get in later periods. So rather than try to actually preserve the flesh, they're actually trying to replicate it in the bandages or in whatever is covering the mummy.
What's also nice is that this had on top, from the lab, we were seeing these large pieces of linen. So the whole thing would have been covered by a linen shroud, which is another, status symbol, but is also quite nice because it's in keeping with this Old Kingdom style of mummification. There were different qualities of linen used in the wrapping, but there was quite a lot of fine linen, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah. And even a sleeve from a garment, one of the oldest in the world, so...
Yeah. What do you mean? What kind of sleeve?
A sleeve, it looks very small. It looks like it's maybe from a child's tunic.
And it was just part of his wrappings?
Yeah, often they would use any kind of old household linens.
So that sleeve that you're talking about, there's nothing to extrapolate from the person who would have worn that sleeve with this mummy originally?
No, I don't think you could say that.
Now, I think most people have heard these stories about in the classic mummification, the brain is removed with the nose and all of that. Is this Too early for that?
At this time period, there are one or two mentions from excavators of brains being removed. Brains would not be normally removed until sort of parts of the Middle Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, the brain just rattles around in the head, and we could hear it rattling here. The way of removing the brain was to go through the nose, the left nostril, and you break through the ethmoid bone. But the nose was completely intact, and you could look in through the sort of base of the skull, and you could see parts of the brain were still there. And Renee, the conservator, has looked at it, and she said it had that sort of walnutty kind of texture, which is very typical of brain.
It's possible that the mummy's head became detached over time, but more likely it was pulled off.
In antiquity, people were robbing the tombs, and they would often pull the head off in order to reach down and get whatever necklaces.
Whatever jewelry was around.
That's also why the hands and the feet are often broken off, because you get this pattern of robbing, because the thieves know where to go. So you go for the neck, you go for the wristlet, the bracelets, and you go for the anklets, which both men and women had. So it's a very typical robbing scenario that you're seeing here.
We were all exclaiming over the beautiful teeth.
Yes.
The teeth were in amazingly good shape.
And ancient Egyptian teeth, even for quite young people, tend to get worn down because there's so much grit in the bread.
Right.
And all of the molars and things had erupted, but he was in good shape.
Yeah.
I mean, he did have some what are called enamel hypoplasias, which are patterns on the teeth that reveal some episodes of nutritional stress.
Also, from the x-rays and from the bones we saw, it was pretty clear that he wasn't suffering from any arthritic diseases.
He's not.
And he didn't look as if he'd done much manual labor,
No.
which is, again, something that would point to his being relatively elite.
Because having to carry heavy loads or engage in hard physical labor leaves traces on your skeleton.
There's extreme sensitivity about displaying human remains from other cultures, but not in this context. It seems that recognition and renown were part of the goal of ancient Egyptian mummification.
This is why it's okay to display Egyptian mummies in museums, because that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to be part of what was going on. So so they would be perfectly happy. What more could they ask?
I know, nothing could be better, really, than to have such public acclaim. I think they would be delighted.
So with the excitement of seeing it for the first time, and now these things you found out just today in your first viewing, what else can you hope to find out?
Hopefully there'll also be things that can be done with the mummy here, but maybe with further examination and closer scrutiny of this CT scans and other things, they might come up with more information about the individual himself.
And any pathologies he was
Any pathologies he would have.
And of course here they're in a great position to do that with the medical school and everything. It's a great crossroads.
Yeah, no, they've got everything here. They've got all the right kind of labs and technology and experts. It's a very nice sort of holistic analysis of the mummy that'll be taking place.
And it was great to see that student involved.
Yeah, no, which is why it was originally acquired in the first place, was as a teaching aid. So it's still 90 years later, it's still being
fulfilling
used,
its original function.
That's quite nice.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. I think this is an example of how, no matter what the technology does for us, with everybody exchanging documents and exchanging photographs and other kinds of very precise imaging techniques, being with the object, with colleagues, trading ideas, there's nothing that substitutes for that excitement.
Nothing.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.